The Ship of Ishtar is a 1924 fantasy novel by A. Merritt. It was serialized from the 8th of November, 1924 to December 13th of the same year in Argosy's All Story, which also featured fantasists like Edgar Rice Burroughs and James Branch Cabell. This is actually turning 100 years old on the day this released. Anyways, this begins with an interwar vibe of modernity and also the apt attention to contemporary archaeology. A man named Kenton is an archaeologist himself, and he gets a mysterious stone from Babylon. It is an ancient stone, but mysteriously light, and it holds some secrets. This is essentially a portal fantasy that kind of reminded me of The Castle in the Attic on how the portal aspect works, as there is a real life-size and living ship and a model ship. This kind of gets into the first idea of duality. Also, if it wasn't obvious, this is one of those early adventure archaeologist stories. Not the earliest, of course. I mean, you have some Haggard and stuff before this, but definitely something you could see in later Indiana Jones. This is also a bit more restrained and grounded in our world, as our protagonist, again with the duality, comes back into our world sometimes and is disconnected from the fantasy before going back again, though. And thus a conflict is thrust upon him, one that is, well, an eternal conflict between Nergal and Ishtar. There's complexity and meant to this, actually, though, because there's meant to be love, I guess, in a sense, and there's these mortal enemies. There's definitely human feelings, and it gets kind of complex, as there's a ship that is magically divided between, well, the priestesses of Ishtar on one side, the priests of Nergal on one side, and they physically cannot cross the ship boundary in the middle at the mast, and haven't been able to. It says 6,000 years. That's actually a little bit of an exaggeration. I believe it's Sargon. I forget which one, but not quite 6,000 years, that guy. So, anyways, but Kenton, who has no affiliation with Ishtar or Nergal, can cross this border. He is like the liminal figure in this sense. And so, for 60 centuries, right, 6,000 years, this ship has been set sail on an endless sea where there are no lands, no stars, no moon, no sun. So we have Shireen, who is a high priestess of Ishtar, the goddess of love. And no, that's not where the name Easter comes from. But she's beautiful and very much a love interest. It's very focused on romance, which was kind of surprising to me. It is a bit outdated in some sense, especially as what she wants most, for example, is to be mastered by a man. So just heads up there. We do have Clawnath, the high priest of Nergal, though, who's god of the underworld. He's definitely the bad guy, of course. I think Merritt utilizes some prose rather well. He does get a little purple at times, as other people have said. But he's well into Elfland, I think. And he manages the suspense and action well with all the stuff that's going on. The ship itself has peoples from many places. It's an anachronistic, mixing, right? We got Persians. We have Sigurd, a Viking. There's also a dwarf, right? There's the personas and Chinese even. There's definitely a tale, though, that's erotic, exotic, and exciting, if we use 3 E's there. It's even intellectual and thoughtful than much early pulp fantasy adventure. It's not quite a voyage to Arcturus. Definitely feels a little more thoughtful than Princess of Mars, though. So some would definitely classify this as sword and sorcery. Definitely just reminds me of early fantasy of sorts. I mean, it's kind of a similar liminal duality thing going on with The King of Elfland's Daughter, which came out the same year, actually. So we'll kind of see. It reminds me some of Lee Brackett, actually, as well. And again, of Haggard. Haggard in a few different ways, like she as well. But definitely early adventure archaeology, maybe and likely inspired by the excavations going on at Uruk around this time. And also, I had heard pointed out, actually, by the guy over at the Grammaticus books, that it kind of reads like a Moorcock novel. And after having read it, I can kind of see that. I didn't think of it at the time, but I can kind of see it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Moorcock's inspired by Merritt. I can't remember. I've read several of his essays, and I just can't remember if he has mentioned Merritt. I know E. Doc Smith mentions Merritt as a really good writer. So, anyways, I was happy to read this. Happy to do so when it's turning 100 years old. And, I wasn't blown away. For example, with other novels around the time, I didn't enjoy it as much as some of those other novels. In fact, I would say I enjoyed pretty much everything I mentioned in here so far more. She, A Princess of Mars, The King of Elfland's Daughter, A Voyage to Arcturus, but it's really not bad. There is one thing, for example, that you could say is like a little like, It doesn't like say slavery is good, for example, but it like really overlooks this idea of slavery. It's just pretty much ignored. Like it's just very casual slavery in this one. In fact, there's a point where Kenton is a slave, and then just later in the book, though, he kind of gets more slaves. So, I mean, that's a little outdated. I would say even for 1924, I can understand maybe not caring. I realize this story is kind of sort of set 6,000 years ago. 6,000, right? With asterisks, but I don't know. That was interesting. Really did. And not to say that slavery is something that's been around for a while, so it's a very big topic. I'm just saying that just beware that Kenton doesn't really care about it at all. Like, doesn't seem to think about it in the slightest. So, just heads up there. Anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.